So we've got a simple agenda today. We've got one presentation that should be pretty sweet. Some good, tips and tricks, and probably an important topic. Some of you might have noticed that this wasn't the original title, but given recent events, we felt like it was appropriate to change that. So fires are not funny. We're not making light of that natural phenomenon. So we have only you can prevent hot messes, strategies for organizing your Tableau sites, organizing/managing your Tableau sites. Your presenters today are going to be myself and coworker Ken Flerledge, with the support in the comment section from David Kelly, who is also on the Moxie team. And then we will, for those of you that are interested in here, go down to Kincaid's and grab a drink or a snack or whatever you guys are up to. Quick review: the DataFam rules of engagement: give credit where credit is due, praise publicly and often, give constructive feedback privately, and share your knowledge. I know all of you here are doing all of those things all the time. Noteworthy upcoming events. Selfishly, I'm promoting the She Talks Data event February 4th with the incomparable Twyla Dang. Those events always sell out, so and we do give preference to women, but if there's a spot, we do not exclude you guys. And then big news is the registration for the Tableau conference, TC25, went live, I think, yesterday or the day before, at the early bird pricing, which I think is like $1,400-ish, somewhere in there. That'll be the cheapest that it will be. It's supposed to be that price until March 6th, I believe, and then it'll go up from there, probably all the way to final price being another $600 or $700-ish. Just don't quote me on that. That's just based on my experience. So if you're going to go, get registered and get all that squared away now. It is a fantastic time with fantastic people. Cannot say enough positive things about that conference. And then the Moxie Foundation, if you want to come and celebrate the women in our community, women in technology in our community, both celebrate with and in honor of them. We are running the Moxie Foundation fundraising gala on May 2nd. That's going to be at the Omni Lakes Hotel in Eagan, super bougie, fancy, right? Bring your wives, girlfriends. Yeah, it's an excuse to get dressed up and have a super fun time. We're having all the fancy things. So, registration for the Tableau conference is obviously on the Tableau website. That's the only place you can do that. Registering for She Talks Data is on Meetup. The gala is also on Meetup and the Moxie Foundation site. So, does anybody else know of any other events or happenings, data related, that they would like to share that is not on this list? I know it's a short list. Okay, well, if you think of something, drop it in the chat. Okay. All right, as per our tradition, let's do at least one, maybe two get to know members. Somebody that maybe you're new to this group, and I'll give people a second to volunteer, and then after that I will just pick. You can answer these questions in particular, or you can go off script. This is just a recommendation. There's no wrong answer here. We just want to actually get to know who you are, right? How about someone from our online audience? Do we have any volunteers? And if I can't even, let me just escape out of this and go back here. anybody's raising their hand.
I'll volunteer.
Thanks, Lisa. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't remember all the questions, but let's see. I'm Lisa Pedersen, and I work for the state of Minnesota in the Department of Human Services, Office of Inspector General, Data Analytics and Insights team. I'm a data analyst, and I've analyzed data that has to do with licenses. So the state licenses a variety of different programs, and I work with that data.
That's really
Hi,
interesting.
Ken. Hi, Kevin. I've been using Tableau for maybe about 2.5 years now, and I really enjoy it. I've been building dashboards for folks at the state, and people have been really happy with the information that we're able to provide. So that's been really fun. Favorite new feature? I don't know. I got stuck on. I was trying to think of what to answer for these last two questions, and I know there's a top feature wish, but I can't think of what it is right now. So if I think of it, I'll pop it into the chat.
Do you have a favorite feature just in general, Lisa? Or like what is like the thing that Tableau can do where you're just like, oh, man, that was a game changer for us?
Well, lately I've been working with maps, geospatial data quite a bit, and I really love that feature. It just it's something that our users have really liked because they can see on the map where the licenses are located.
Mm-hmm.
And you can highlight based on different dimensions. So often people want to look at it by licensor. So one licensor is responsible for this grouping of licenses, but they're spread out over 10 different counties. Well, maybe there's some rebalancing that needs to be done. So that's my favorite feature right now.
I want to jump in and say Lisa's being very humble. She was one of the people that was shortlisted for the Data is Beautiful awards last year. I think there's like 5 or 6 Tableau users that have ever been shortlisted for that. So stop being so humble, Lisa.
And thanks for for tooting her horn for her, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping in and sharing, Lisa. It was, the name sounded familiar, so it's very nice to get to know you a little bit better. All right. Do we have anybody from the room? I know, like, there's a pretty good core group of people here. But anybody from the room that hasn't done this in a while? No takers. Why don't we have you come up? And do you want to come up here and that way these guys can see your face?
Sure.
You won't be able to see your face, but
that's fine. I know what my face looks like.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. My name is Ted Hermanson. I'm actually in between jobs right now. My most recent job was about a month ago. Recast Software is the name. I was a marketing operations analyst there. I actually use Tableau CRM or CRM Analytics, so similar to Tableau, not exactly the same, but I think they're very, very similar. Used it for about a year. Favorite new feature, I mean, I liked their coding language. I felt like it was fairly intuitive, as well as easy to look up ChatGPT questions if I was stuck. It usually was able to figure it out for me. So, but I guess feature wish, it'd be great if they could integrate more AI features right in the tool itself. I think they will. I was actually at Dreamforce this year. It really talked a lot about Tableau and like AI integrations for the future. So I think that will be coming very soon. Talking to some people, but yeah, it always could be more simple for us to dig in the data and then be able to have analytical insights shared out to the team members too.
Yeah. Did you have a SQL background?
Sorry?
Did you have a background in SQL before doing Tableau?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of like
Some...
just Microsoft SQL Server, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't so scary, was it? All right. Well, with that, let me stop sharing this presentation. And Ken, you're going to drive, right? And I'm just going to...
Sorry, I was muted while I was trying to share my screen and it wouldn't let me hit the unmute button. Yes, I'm going to drive.
Okay. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
All right. You see my screen?
Can do. Yep. Perfect. All right. Only you can prevent hot messes. That's a good image. I like that. Didn't see that before.
Hang on a second. All right. Wanted to get the chat over. All right. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so some of you would mentioned this earlier. We did change the title. It did reference the word, dumpster fire was the term that we originally used, even though I still feel like that's very like apt for the topic. We just wanted to make sure that nobody thought we were making light of or joking about fires. We do not think that they are funny. We do encourage you guys to consider supporting financially or however you can. We've got a list of charities that have been vetted that are supporting the fires in LA right now. So please consider that as you are able.
Yeah, I'll share those in the chat here in just a second.
I think somebody did.
I did, but it came in really weird, so I'm going to repost it.
Okay, cool.
There we go.
Perfect. All right, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Serena Roberts. I'm the Chief Get Shit Done Officer at Moxie Analytics. No, that is not like what I put on, like, people to the state and the federal government, but gosh darn it, that's my title as far as I'm concerned. I'm born and raised in Minnesota. I have one husband, just in case you were curious. 3 children who are actually now 10 and 11 and almost 24 in a minute since I made this slide. 2 kitties and 1 dog.
Do you want me to do me? Or you want to do me?
All right. You do you.
I'm Ken Flerlich. I'm a consultant at Moxie Analytics. I'm a Tableau visionary, part of the Hall of Fame. So I don't know if y'all know what that is, but Kevin and I, and Kevin's on the call. We're twin brothers. We're both Tableau visionaries. Yeah. I'm single, so I'm like I've been traveling a bunch and doing the nomad thing. It's kind of fun. I'm at home right now, but itching to get back on the road. My kids are both grown. They're 20 and 18, and do have a cat who was on my lap a minute ago. And Serena said I looked like Dr. Evil petting my cat, and then 1 turtle.
Did you forget to mention we're going to be raffling off a date later?
Oh, what?
I'm kidding. I'm just teasing you. Okay. That is Ken Flerlich. So just a quick slide about Moxie. We're a data and analytics consulting firm. We do data stuff for money, and some of those things we categorize as building culture and capacity. Others are more around like foundation and formality, those really foundational aspects of all of the good work that we do. data training and community building, data visualization, specialized support and coaching, enterprise standards and best practices, which is actually the bucket that we're going to talk about today. And I like to call that little g governance. And then, of course, data management and big G governance we do as well, data strategy and AI readiness. All right, enough of the sales pitch, right? How many of you guys think that your Tableau sites are a mess? Yeah, no, like we close our eyes. It's okay. There's no shame. As a consultant, you get to see a lot of different Tableau environments. I can think of maybe one or two that I was like, damn, that's well done.
Agreed.
Are varying degrees of hot messes. And even with the best of intentions, right? Sometimes it's just like you got thousands of people in there doing stuff. Even if you have rules and standards, like how do you get them to follow them? So even with the best of intentions, your Tableau sites can turn into hot messes pretty quickly. All right, so let's talk about some of these things. So I mentioned this little g governance. Think of this as essentially tool-specific enterprise standards and best practices. So in this case, we're talking about Tableau. As opposed to like big G or formal governance, which is more about tool agnostic policies, processes, regulation, compliance, those kinds of things. And so eventually, like big G governance needs to translate to little g governance. So as you are starting to think about little g governance, you may want to look at what you guys have, what, if anything, your organizations have as far as formal data governance. The other thing that I will say about thinking about this, separating the two between big G and little g governance, is that there is less stigma, might be the right word. There's less apprehension. Like it's just less of a can of worms when you're talking about, start talking about data governance programs, and immediately like you're going to slow everything that you're doing down. And like, oh, we need a committee, and we need to have this approved, and we need a plan, and we need and really, really quickly, it gets so incredibly formal that you can never get anything done, which is the reason why formal data governance programs tend to struggle so much. So if you keep it boxed in that, like, no, you don't even have to call it governance at all. You can say, we're just talking about Tableau best practices. These enterprise best practices and standards as they apply to Tableau, what we're doing with data in that space. You have a lot more freedom and can move at a much faster pace to implement some of these things, especially in smaller organizations. So that is just a couple of benefits of thinking about these two things as very separate. All right. So, and these governance models actually are inspired or taken from much more like big G governance philosophies and methods, but they are very much applicable to little g governance. When you think about these things, you can deploy them through a centralized model where it is all about a concentration of control, right? One group that is controlling everything inside the organization, and they're usually pretty bulky. They usually don't have, great reputations.
Yeah.
Outside of their functions, right? They tend to be looked at as bottlenecks, people who are just walking around with sticks, whipping them and making sure people are following the rules. On the totally other end of that spectrum are just like self-governed or ungoverned spaces, data environments. And that's not great either, right? That's a really quick way to get to those hot messes. And then we have something that's a little bit in between that is referred to generally as federated or hybrid. And it is where you've centralized some things. You've said, we're going to define this sort of layer And that is our enterprise, where the enterprise is focusing on standards. And so we're going to use that as a foundation for these federated groups, usually sitting within these different functions: finance, marketing, sales, operations, what have you. And then they can add their own flavor on top of that to account for the function specific nuances that they deal with. And that is a model that we have seen be successful more than some of the others. I'm not going to tell you that any of them are wrong, right? Because, and that'll be a theme throughout this entire presentation, is that our job here is not to be super prescriptive, because the true answer to a lot of these questions that we're going to get you guys to start thinking of here is, you have to think about and do what is right for your organization right now. And the only wrong answer here is to just not think about it. So, all right. Next, this is you. All right.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in here. So yeah, so once you've sort of established that, and you probably already have a feel for what your governance model is. It's probably not something you really have to plan out. You probably have this sort of structure in place already. You kind of know how your organization operates, right? You can start to make some other decisions around your environment, right? And again, as Serena said, we're not going to be prescriptive here, but we're going to try to give you some things that are important to think about, and maybe some examples of ways you could do some of these things. So the first thing you really need to think about, and you kind of have to start from the top and go down, right? So first thing you want to think about is your sites. This is a little less of a decision when you're working in a Tableau cloud environment, because you have to kind of go through these extra steps to set up new sites. But if you have a Tableau server environment, it's really easy to just spin up new sites, right? So so the question is sort of like, when do you need a new site? And ultimately, sites are really about creating these sort of strict boundaries. So you really shouldn't set up multiple sites unless you have a need for those really strict boundaries. So some examples might be things like, if you have some really, really sensitive content that you want to keep totally isolated from everyone else. Now, important thing to remember is that with just normal permissions and a single site, you can still secure that without a separate site. But if you really want to be very, 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 super, super careful, maybe you have this super secret R&D group that is doing something, crazy that you don't want any chance of that getting into the wrong hands, then maybe you have a separate site, right? But generally speaking, another example would be, if you have, regulatory requirements that might require that. Something I've seen is that a company might have a division that has sort of a conflict of interest with the rest of the company, and you might want to create a separate site for that. So just to give you an example, and there are some other things that we need to really think about as you're making this decision. So here's just sort of a really simple, oversimplified decision tree, right, for determining whether you need another site. First of all, I would say start with a single site, right? As your default position, say we're going to try to use a single site, and only create another site if we absolutely have a need to do that. The big question you have to ask again is, do you need to create those sort of strict boundaries like that? And again, some examples, highly confidential content, division with a conflict of interest, those kinds of things might trigger that. If you don't need to create a boundary, use a single site and you're done. You don't have to worry about ever sort of concerning yourself with the rest of this. If you do need to create those boundaries, and you really need to think about some of these other implications of having separate sites, things like the fact that you can't share workbooks or data sources, any sort of content between those sites. So that means you have to, if you have similar data, you have to sort of manage them on each of those sites. Same with people, users. Users have to be managed separately, and they actually require a separate license for each site that they're on. So if you have your CEO that needs to access 5 different sites, then that's going to be 5 different licenses. And then all of this just sort of comes together to create added management and governance that you have to do, little g governance that you have to do on that site, on those sites to keep it managed. So think about those things really carefully. If you still think you need another site, then create a new site. If not, default to that single site. So again, default position, use a single site, but if you really need to create that boundary and you're okay with all these other considerations, the other implications, then another site would be okay to do. Okay, so once you have that sort of site structure, then one of the most critical governance, small g governance things that you have to do is create a sacred area. So this is, and we're going to show some examples of this here in a moment, but this is really sort of, this is that place where people are getting their production content and using it to make decisions, right? So you want it to be, you want it to be validated, verified, checked, accurate. You want to make sure that the data is good and that the visuals are good, and you want to try to separate these things using different markers as well. So you might have some sort of obvious visual cues that it's the sacred area, or naming conventions, or things like that. This is all about sort of drawing a line in the sand with the sacred area. Those governance principles that we're practicing have to apply. And because of that, you want to sort of limit the number of people that have access to that area. You only want, and you only want a handful of people. Not the whole world can publish to that. And with that, probably have to have some basic sort of, change control processes and approvals to sort of get things moved in that area, right? You don't have to overdo it. You don't have to have all these big committees and things like that, but you need to have some sort of process and documentation to make sure that you know what's going there and when. And of course, if we have a sacred area, that also means that we need sort of a non-sacred area as well, that place where we can do that development, the QA, and those kinds of things before it makes it to that sacred area. And we'll show some examples of that in a moment. So that then leads us to sort of thinking about how we organize our projects on Tableau Cloud or Server. And, a really common approaches are, I think the most common approach I see are sort of divisional or departmental. Or you will see sort of functional or topic focused things sometimes as well. But the most common I see is that sort of department division structure. If you already have cloud or server, you've probably got something established. But if you're starting off with this and you're trying to figure out how best to do this, or you're starting a sort of restructuring of your existing environment, just sort of think about how you do this with other systems. How is your OneDrive or Google Drive or some content management system sort of organized, right? And borrow from the rest of the organization and how they're doing these things. Try to align to that, and that just simplifies things across the entire enterprise if you can do that. Or you can look at an org chart, right, and think about the best ways to organize it within that org chart. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? But you do want to make sure that you have something that's consistent, that you can sort of apply across the organization. You don't want pockets of your environment to be departmental and then pockets to be functional, and because then you're going to end up with sort of a hot mess, right? Of course, we need to remember as we're building out these projects that need for those sort of non-production, those non-sacred areas, where are we going to put those? Again, we're not going to tell you exactly what you should do because it all depends on your environment and how you want to do things. But again, we'll give you an example of that here in a moment. One thing I think is really important with your projects is don't be overly specific, right? You don't want to get down to, individual tiny, you might start with department and you're like, well, maybe we need something for this sub team of that department and that sub team. And you end up with, these, you got hundreds of different projects on your environment, and that becomes hard to manage, right? But you also don't want it to be too high level either, right? You don't want just one big project for the entire company, obviously. So find that sort of right balance between, enough projects to be, somewhat detailed, but not so many that it's really hard to manage. And I think, also remember that sub projects are a thing. So you can create, say, a finance project and then create sub projects within that. And we definitely encourage you to use those sub projects. It can be really powerful. Just be careful not to go too many layers deep. I think, 2 layers, 3 layers at most is probably as deep as I would go in a project. You start doing that, you might want to sort of rethink. You start getting beyond that, you might want to rethink your overall strategy for how you do this. Yeah. So again, we'll give you some examples here in just a moment of some of those things. With projects and with the content that we're putting into those projects, think about standardizing the naming conventions. Come up with some sort of formula. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all these formal approved documents for it, but just come up with some sort of basic convention for these things. So, maybe you have the project name as part of it, maybe the project, and then sort of the business question that they're asking or something like that. One advantage of having the project name is that it allows you to sort of maybe you have two workbooks that are kind of answering the same question, but one is finance and one is operations. So having the project name in there might help you to just sort of distinguish those a little bit better. If something
you is just into my head, sorry.
Yep.
Is in making convention, leave the sort of breadcrumbs for where it lives, how it's organized inside. So if it's, a finance inside your finance project, and then inside a sub project for executive summaries or something like that, have those things be part of the name, because then there's never any question of where they are, where if you end up making changes to them and needing to save it back to that place, there's never any question as to where that came from. And the other nice thing is that if you get really tight on what that formula should be, that becomes part of your template, right? When you create a starter template, you put, here's the title and here's the formula, and it's just right there. So, go ahead.
As you're saying that, I thought about this one environment that I saw where I was just doing a search of the I don't remember it was cloud or server, but search of the environment for workbooks, and I saw I think I saw like 50 data sources called Data Source One, and so first of all, that's terrible naming convention, because what is Data Source One, right? But even if it was finance, maybe the data source was called finance data, right? And there were 20 of those, right? Where they come from is so critical, right? Because one might be in a work in process development, data source project, right? Where one is in the sacred area. How do I know what the difference is when I'm doing those sorts of searches, right? So that that breadcrumbing sort of concept would have made my life so much easier working with that particular Tableau cloud environment, because I would have known where all of these are coming from, right? And of course, using something better than Data Source One. That gets into a whole other thing with Tableau, with Sheet One and Dashboard One and Workbook One and all those kinds of things, which you should not do either.
Yeah.
Okay. And then along with sort of the naming conventions, it can be tempting to put too much information in there, right? And you end up with these giant long names, right? Where you have, every possible piece of information that you might want in there. So if you want to store some other useful information about a workbook or a data source or any type of content, then you can really leverage these tags. So you tag a content with maybe the subject area, the topic, maybe even like the business question that it's answering, maybe metrics that it's using, right? So, think about how and where you can really leverage tags to make content more discoverable. They're searchable, right? So it's really easy to just search for a tag and pull up content related to one of those tags. So it's a great little tool for providing additional information in that content.
Yeah, and pro tip from David Kelly is that you have an opportunity to communicate and or train your broader data users, or at least the people who are doing a lot of development, create a standardized list of what those tags should be. So it's not just because that in itself could be a hot mess, and then it's not very useful. So if you set here are 20 tags that we'd love to stick with, right? And then create a process for I think we need a tag for this or that, and then you add it to that approved list. So it just can become another thing to govern in a little G sense, but they can be really, really useful if you can keep your arms wrapped around it.
Yeah, I just went through an exercise, that same exercise with a client on their early data catalog, but tagging had just sort of become this Wild West method.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to wrap our hands around like which articles and artifacts in the catalog all our team was supposed to be touching.
Yep.
And we wound up just going and nuking a whole bunch of tags and starting over.
Yep.
Because it was like,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is the standard. Now we know how to find it. We know
Yeah.
how to tell everyone else to find it. How to
Yeah.
apply tags.
It literally becomes absolutely useless
Right.
unless
Yeah.
you
Yes. Yeah.
Strategy for tags.
Yep. Tag strategy.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you can't like enforce this on cloud or server. You can't create,
Feature wish, guys. Feature
Yeah.
wish.
nice wish, but so you'll have to manage that sort of procedurally. But I think, yeah, having something like that can be, definitely prevent a hot mess. You can definitely get into a hot mess with tags for sure. Okay, so we're going to give you just a quick example. We've got, the project structure. This example is going to show project structure. It's going to show some naming conventions. It's going to show, the idea of having this sort of that sacred area as well as the sort of the non-sacred area, as well as some other sort of tips here. So here we have an example where we got sort of 3 departments and they each have their own top level project. You can see we've got information in the info tab. I think that's really useful. What is this project? Who do you contact if you have questions? I think it's also useful to have those little images as well to give you a little bit more about it. And then within finance here, we've got a development area and we've got a production, which is that sacred area. And if we double click into there, we can see sort of our workbooks here. We didn't use the breadcrumbing method, but we're basically, these workbooks are named based on sort of the business question that you're answering here. And then if we click over development, we can see we've got a workbook there and you see it's got in development in that name of that workbook. So to make it very clear that this is sort of in process. So that's just a simple example of a project structure and some naming conventions that you could leverage. Again, this is not, there's no right answer to this. You just need to think about your organization and what works best for you.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Specifically about the images, they can be really helpful for users. Our experience is that it has to be posted externally and accessible through a publicly accessible link. So we've just used like a personal imager account, which is not super ideal. If anything super private, that needs to, but it is publicly accessible. So we've got a logo on it and things like that. Probably a feature request to be able to simply just upload a JPEG or a PNG. But
I don't know why they don't have that. It's kind of, they don't make it easy, and it's not easy to add those images, even if they're hosted. You have to do like markup language kind of thing to do it. But yeah, it'd be nice if you could just upload an image and.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that wasn't me being stupid. So.
You're exactly right. It definitely, it definitely has to be posted on a publicly accessible website.
It just goes to show that even the people developing the Tableau product from the get-go, this kind of governance and oversight was an afterthought, right? We're all playing catch up. Like, oh yeah, this shit is important.
Yeah,
especially if you want to be doing AI. It's important.
And it's probably worth considering how Tableau came about, right? The first product was desktop. It was a client tool, and server didn't come along until many years later, right? So they didn't even start thinking about sort of that this could be an enterprise solution. It was more of a point solution. And so, over time, they started sort of building out all these other sort of enterprise capabilities, but it started out as that sort of, analyst tool and has become more of an enterprise tool. And they're building in more and more and more of these capabilities over time.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to kick it back to you, Serena.
On the whole, project organizing, managing, naming conventions. Just chat for questions. So Kelly, you asked where where we'll be able to access the recording. The Twin Cities Tableau user group does have a YouTube channel. Our videos go up there. There's will be a link to that in like a wrap up email here. So that should be pretty easily accessible. Just give me a couple days to get my crap together and get that out. And then Linda, we did like talk for a quick minute on how do we change the image.
I can actually show that
You
in
want
a
to?
moment if you want. Do you want me to show that?
If you feel prepared to do that,
Give me just 30 seconds to get there, and then I can.
All right.
Show it. Okay.
Well, I can start talking about managing users unless you. Oh, are you?
Right here. Great. Are you seeing my Tableau cloud?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So to do that, you go into the project, and then you. Oh boy, I can never remember. I think you click the info icon here. So I clicked into the project. I click the info icon, and then I click edit here. And here's where you can do like this, a little bit of like markup language stuff. So any like free text you can just put right in this about box, and it will display that. I've got these clickable links for email addresses here. So those use this little bit of like HTML markup here to basically do like the mail to for that person. But the images, I don't know if I can zoom in on this. The images, you just do like these exclamation points, and then in between the exclamation points, you put a URL to some image. Yeah, so this one is hosted on Imager. I don't know how you say that, but so it's just that between. And you can see if you do formatting hints, you can see some other sort of options for doing that. All right. Yep.
On the spot, ad hoc pro tips. Okay. So let's talk about managing users. So I guess like with all of this, the message should be like, don't unnecessarily overcomplicate it, right? Like keep it simple as you can. Best, I've got somebody laughing over here. First look at how you are, aligning your user groups or security groups in other instances. And we could have a whole conversation about, Active Directory and like all of that integration and stuff. But even if you're just referencing how you're setting up your AD groups and modeling it after that without the direct integration, it's just at least something that you should consider. So try not to reinvent the wheel as much as possible. You can think about having groups that are really closely aligned to the license levels. So you can have roles for creators, roles for explorers, and roles for viewers. And of course, you can, for those of you that have experience, getting in and managing permissions, you can ratchet those backward, right? You can give someone a full creator license, let them hold that seat, and then strip back some of the things that they can do project by project or even workbook by workbook if you really wanted to. But again, that I wouldn't recommend that. Like manage as many people in groups as possible, and that's going to cut down on your time of like going in and doing these onesie twosie things. I've seen clients where they've got individual, like every person is in there and every person they can do this and not that. And it's just like, I quit. I'm out. I'm not doing this. So, and that also, right, having that, maybe not a direct relationship, but some kind of a relationship between the permissions and the license type in the ways that you're creating your groupings will just make it really, really obvious for you to manage those. Let's see, what other notes do we have here?
Sorry, I got ahead of you.
I'm just making sure I'm not forgetting.
I just want to reiterate that the user level thing, it can be really easy to start giving permissions to individual users. See this more in that sort of governance model where, in more of the sort of, oh boy, what did we call the the third governance model. I forget the term
Ungoverned?
I used.
Self-governed?
Yeah, self-governed. Yeah. See that a lot in that, where maybe multiple people are managing permissions for their projects, which is totally fine and totally reasonable. Need to make sure those people know how to set permissions, right? And need to have some basic governance rules in place. And I think one of those is to say no user level permissions, because that becomes totally unmanageable.
Yeah. I would also just add, like, thinking about whether you have data security applied at the data layer should impact how you're managing permissions inside your Tableau environment as well. So maybe that data layer for you don't check inside your Tableau environment. You don't need to double up on that. And my philosophy is always like, be as transparent as you can, right? Don't, obviously, like, if you're working with sensitive information, PII, PHI, like anything that you really need to lock down, do that, please. Please do that. But if it's like, I don't want my salespeople to see my operation data, and I don't want my executives to see transactional data, who cares, right? Like, that's what favorites are for. That's what, doing Tableau Pulse is for. Like, we don't need to use permissions to try and drive preferences, because that's just putting a whole lot of work on a very few, one or a small amount of people to try to manage the preferences of a large audience. Let them do that. If there isn't a true security reason why you need to restrict access to a project, a dashboard, a data set, whatever that might be, don't waste your time and your energy on it. So, all right. Anything else to add on that, Mitt?
Nope, nothing me.
Questions? Okay.
So this is kind of where ours is turning into.
Are you the admin? Are you doing the administration?
Yeah, it's part of our job. Paul and I are our coworkers. And I think we've done a pretty good job at the site, at every level, having that sacred space and development area. And that's relatively clean access to workbooks is kind of clean, but I mean, what happens at home, gone away from allowing certain creators to just grant access to users. I mean, it's all group oriented, but now we've got so damn many groups that's all out of control.
Yeah.
Right. And
Understanding the overlap between groups too.
Yeah.
yeah, overlap between groups. And then it's not just that workbook level. You got embedded data sources, you got Tableau data sources, you got virtual connections, you all have different levels and different groups, and we end up with workbooks that people have access to, but they don't have access to.
Yep. Are you using any, like, what are you using to manage this right now? Is it just, do you have it in an Excel spreadsheet, or no, nothing?
It's just Tableau groups in Tableau.
You just, so you don't have any way to, like, take a step back and look at that at 10,000 foot view?
Reports we built that tell us who's in what groups and what their access is. Seeing.
Yeah.
Right, based on the metadata that we get out of them.
I
just wonder if you have any thoughts to that. You end up with 100 groups you're managing. It's no better than managing all the users.
Yeah. How many people are in your organization?
Well, and how many people are on our site?
Yeah. How many people are on your site? Better question.
About 400, 450.
Okay. And how many groups do you have? You have 100?
More than that.
You've got some issues, for sure. Did everybody on the online, did you guys hear that question?
Not fully, no.
No? Okay. So essentially, what was your name again? Zach. Okay. Zach was saying that he feels like they're doing a great job of organizing their projects from sort of a navigational perspective, but where their site is turning into a hot mess is like managing the users and the permissions by groups. They've only got 400 or so people on their Tableau environment, and they have hundreds of groups, permission
Yeah.
groups to
Yeah.
manage does seem a little bit out of line. So
Yeah.
his question was like, thoughts or maybe advice on how to get that gold. I would say that, so what I have seen one client in particular do was they would create a matrix, and on one axis they would have and now this was very much aligned to their business. So like departmental, right? Here are our sort of main categories of business. And then on the other axis was like the types of data, right? Like just like sort of and there was a lot of, right? Like, okay, well, marketing has got, our marketing or CRM, Eloqua, whatever, right? Like all the marketing data sets. HR's got, this, and they would put actually the sensitivity. There's PAI in here, there's PHI here, right? They'd have some color coding of sensitivity classifications there. And then they would, I'm trying to remember what was on, there was like a third axis over here where there was a first attempt to align the project structure to the way that they looked at their business like that. And so they could just make sure that, like, let me look at this user. Where does this user fall on this sort of matrix of what department they're in, what data they might have access to, or if they were in multiple departments and they truly needed to be there. It's sort of, they used it as like a roadmap for taking a step back and looking at, okay, what groups do we have? In making sure that they are all distinctly different from each other, taking into account the types of data that they should have access to. And then like, here's our sort of roadmap for where we might need to plunk this person. They did some other step where they would kind of take a review when, watching for when their Tableau site, projects were getting really out of line with what that sort of core structure was. And then they would look at, well, maybe we need to add something here to account for that. Maybe we can fold this in with this other thing. So maybe you need to do it inside Tableau, but this particular client had found success just using an Excel spreadsheet as that, like, I need to be able to look at the forest here and like level set against how do we actually run our business and make sure that we're in line with that. Ken, what would you like? Let's open it up to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you just shared, Serena. I think the ratio of sort of users to groups is a really critical thing, and you're basically at like a 1 to 4 or 2 to 4 or something like that, and that is far too small, right? You're getting to the point where you have almost as many groups as users, and that is obviously a clear indicator that you're probably being too specific with those groups, right? So you really do need to take a step back and ask, why are we doing it like this? And then think, how, what do we really need? Like, and I think that's leading into what you just suggested, Serena, but what do we really need? And there might be you might have some battles on your hand that you have to fight, right? You might have to have some really serious discussions with your security group about, do we really need this level of granularity on these things, right? And try to come up with compromises on how deep you need to go with those things. So there might be some more sort of organizational kinds of discussions that you have to have before you can then implement, a new setup in Tableau.
I just ask for justification. Why does your group why does this grouping need to exist? And if there isn't a good justification for that, find another place for them to go.
A couple notes from the comments. I just wanted to call out Susith. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but mentioned Active Directory, right? So you can connect your server or cloud environment to Active Directory. My experience is not a lot of clients are able to do that successfully because Active Directory ends up in the same, almost every Active Directory I've ever seen, and suffers from the same problem, right? You end up with just a total mess of user groups and things like that. And it doesn't always align to how you want to do things in your server or cloud environment. But if you do have a good, clean, well-structured AD environment, then leverage that. Those groups will pull over. You can secure it at the group level, and then you don't have to worry about creating any groups. You just use those groups. That also might be a good, argument in that question with your security offices as well. Like, we're just going to leverage the stuff that's already established, and then that takes a lot of that management out of your hand. All you have to do is handle the permissions. And then Linda also mentioned, so thank you for that. And then Linda mentioned using admin insights to just sort of analyze the current users and groups. And that's great as well. Yeah, because all the users and groups, if you have cloud, then you have admin insights, and there's data sources with users and groups and group memberships and all that kind of stuff. So you at least have the data of what you have today to get a picture of that, so that you can start to formulate what it might look like in the future, or as Serena said, to sort of audit, are we actually meeting that sort of strategy that we've come up with?
Yeah, I think that's the piece that that doesn't get translated into the admin insights in Tableau, is the why, the business reasons why you need another place to document that. And I think that this applies to Active Directory. It applies to anything that you're trying to manage in terms of these like groups of people. It started out with good intention. It started out based on some kind of logic that worked for them and made sense at the time. And businesses grow and change. And if you don't have regular intentional reviews of, this is how we were doing it, let's ask the question, does this still work? Does it not? If not, why not? And what do we need to do about it? And then that you have sort of a formal change process of how you think about the ways that your business should be organized and segmented. And then that should cascade to all of the things that's based off of, rather than just, we started out this way and then we had this exception and then this exception and we grew and then we just, right. And it becomes a monster, right? Because no one went back and looked at the core architecture and the business reasons why we did it that way in the first place. So I don't know. Plug in somewhere. I'm having battery insecurity. All right, let's keep going.
Do we want to see an example here?
Oh yeah, example. Okay.
Sorry. Do you want me to do this, or do you want to do it, Serena? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, this was you moving the mouse, so I'll let you.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, here we just have in this finance project, we have. Let me go back. So we're going to look at finance, and we're going to look at both we're going to look at, so remember the finance project from the example we shared before had a finance development project, sub-project, and a finance production sub-project. So we're going to start by looking at the finance project as a whole to see sort of what the default permissions. So when we've got sub-projects, those default permissions will apply to the sub-projects when you create them, right? But then you have to sort of, it all depends on what they're locking permissions and things like that. But we're going to have different permissions on those sub-projects in this case. So we're going to start off by looking at the overall finance permissions. And we've got three sort of key groups for finance. We've got our viewers, people that can view and interact with it, developers, people that can actually develop content, and then deployers. Those are those people that can push things into that sacred area, right? Very small group of people. So our production is not going to have, developers aren't going to have access to that. We don't want them going in and changing things in production. So we've only got the viewers who can view that content, which might be a sizable group, and then that small deployer group. And then, of course, the permissions are going to be different for those different groups. And then our development environment is basically just going to have those developers, right? Because they're the ones developing in that environment, and the deployers. We want to keep our viewers out of here because we don't want them accidentally getting in here and seeing in-process work necessarily, right? We might at some point, because we want them to review and validate those as part of our QA process. But generally speaking, for that stuff that's ongoing in process, let's try to keep those viewers out of there. This is a very simple example. And obviously it tends to get a little bit more complex than this, but just to give you an idea.
All right. Thanks for walking through that, Ken. So managing licenses, Ken touched on this a little bit earlier, particularly for people who are on cloud. Licenses cost money, right? So like any good financially responsible person, you're going to want to manage your licenses. So in the beginning, Ken was talking about multiple sites, right? Like one of the biggest reasons why people don't do that who are on cloud is because you need essentially double the amount of licenses that you have. So that's a big reason why most people don't do that. Back to the built-in admin insights, that's a great place to look at, like who's using, who's not using. Are they licensed with the right level of licenses? Because different levels of licenses cost they're more expensive for creators. So what you're going to want to do is create a process, right? And you leverage those admin insights, and then use that information to follow a process, a decision tree that will objectively tell you how to handle these things. So here we have an example. This was created by David Kelly. We actually did something very, very similar to this for a real client. And we simplified this and obviously took out some of the specifics and thought we would share it with you. So in this scenario, as for existing users, so the first question, have they created anything or published anything in the last 90 days, right? If not, like, do they have Tableau installed? Maybe they're just so new that they haven't done it yet. If so, right, have they published content? Well, let's leave them at that creator level. If they haven't logged in 90 days, well, why don't we unlicense them? Because they don't have Tableau installed, they haven't created anything in 90 days. Let's unlicense them and wait for them to make some noise, right? If they have logged in, but they haven't published content, then hey, why don't you give them a viewer and see how that works for them. The last little path here is, if they haven't published content, follow up with them, right? Maybe they're really struggling. So before you just yank something away from them, if you wanted to be that super nice admin, you could reach out to them and just say, hey, what's going on? What can I help you with? Do you need some training? So yeah, this is just a really simple way. You don't have to overcomplicate this. If you did this once every 90 days, you would be miles ahead of a lot of organizations.
Or you can wait like 5 years and then do it, and then go back with all the money that you can save the organization and be a superstar. Not that I'm recommending doing that, but you could do that.
Yeah, we've seen that. Hey, are you interested in $200,000 more dollars? Or so another example we have is a process for assigning new licenses. So recommendation is to start them at the middle of the road, right? Just give them an Explorer license. You may have some criteria for people who are even eligible for Tableau licenses beforehand, right? If you don't, you may want to, like, does this person, will they ever have, are they driving a forklift in the warehouse? Maybe they're just not ever going to need a Tableau license. So there may be some pre-questions before this process applies, but let's assume that there is some kind of identified need for them to work with data. Give them an Explorer license. And then essentially they go into that bucket of now you're just managing an existing user, right? Sign them a license, see what happens. The exception there is that if they start bothering you, right? Like You give them an Explorer license and they start bothering you about, I can't do this, I can't do that, right? Tableau sucks. Well, maybe they need a creator license.
Yeah, I think the key point, with Explorer would be, these would be people that would be using web edit, right? They'd be using web edit with published data sources to build stuff, right? So if they get to the point where they're starting to hit those inevitable limitations of web edit, then it's time to move them to creator. If they don't complain, then they're okay with Explorer.
Yeah. But yeah, easier process than to try and have them guess what they're gonna do before they have any experience with Tableau, assuming they're new to this. But it's, let's judge what they actually do versus what they say they're going to do or what we think that we're going to do.
Looks like we have two different versions of this. Here's the version you wanted to use, I think, Serena. Assign Explorer. Did they complain? If so, then go creator. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we forgot to delete that.
Have to delete the other one.
So yeah, this one's even simpler, right? But you get it. Just do something, right? Create some process that works for you and use the process. And then, you're going to want to regularly review these things because businesses change. They might set these rules, these standards, these processes up, and then, things are going to look different a year later. So using the admin insights or any other custom things that you have developed along the way, and review the processes themselves to see if they're still relevant and accurate to the business, and like schedule it. And you're going to want to pick people to be stakeholders in, to have a voice in that regard, and pick those people carefully. But if it's just you at your desk and you're making all these decisions, I mean, that might work in some smaller organizations, but it is good to share that responsibility and get different perspectives from across the organization. All right, let me see. Yeah, I think we've got one more slide, and that is you got to sell it, or the idea of you're going to spend all this time and energy creating these standards and these best practices, and you're probably going to spend some time documenting them and maybe creating training materials and communication to go out. And you have to think about that strategically and sort of wrap a campaign around it. Like, you're selling this, and you also have to do it in a way where you're highlighting why it's good for them. That these aren't just rules for the sake of rules because we like rules and control. That literally we are trying to save you time. We're trying to save our developers time in creating these things from the get-go. We're trying to save our consumers time in finding what they need when they need it. All of these things work together in concert to make your Tableau investments have a greater return on investment, and save people time so they can do cooler, more fun, and more impactful things than managing licenses and answering the same dang questions over and over and over again. So don't forget to do this. And if you have an internal functions, like enterprise communication teams, internal marketing teams that can help you create some really polished, professional looking material, take advantage of it. It's okay for, even if it's just a two-man show, Paul and Zach, make yourselves look, grander and, bigger and more put together than maybe you really are. That's okay to do because you'll get there. All right. So really, it's just we hope that we gave you guys some things to think about. We know that we weren't very, very prescriptive in these things because there's just so many nuances across organizations that any answer we put, any specific answer we put out here, some isn't going to work for most people. But it is a place to start thinking about what works for your organizations right now. And if you guys have questions, follow-up questions, if people online have comments that they would like to add, this is obviously very community focused, so it doesn't need to be Ken and I and David and whoever else just talking at you. So any questions or comments from? Tom says Explorer licenses are consistently overpurchased and underused from my experience.
Yep, agreed. Creator licenses are often overused as well. I see so many organizations that have creator licenses sitting on the shelf, you know, and it's just, those are too expensive to be wasted.
Yep, got to earn it. Got to show you need those. Salesforce does not mind. They will not encourage you. They will not be doing those reviews for you. Okay, well, if anybody has questions they didn't feel comfortable asking in a group setting, you can always reach out to us on LinkedIn or come at us through our website, and we're happy to answer these questions to the best of our ability. So, cool. Well, if that's all, I think we can wrap for today, 15 minutes early.
Yeah, nice.
So, all right. Well, thanks, Ken and David, for your contributions, and Kevin for just being here, and all the rest of you guys for showing up virtually and, of course, in person. So,
Thanks, everyone.
yeah.
Bye.